Okay, so I think that we can start. It's 11. So basically, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's 11 a.m. in Thailand and 9 p.m. in San Francisco, USA, from where our guest is joining us. I'm Nick Sturman, and I'm a consultant with GIA specializing in pearls, but I've also been the MC of 116, well, of most of 116 GIA gemstone gatherings that have been held by GIA Thailand so far. Everyone in GIA hopes you are well and managing to cope with the disruption the virus is causing to our lives and economies. I think it's safe to say that the last few months have been challenging for everyone, to say the least. So, you know, we can only hope that things will get better. I was just discussing with Shehan before, and we were preparing, but things are looking sort of mixed in different parts of the world, and we have to hope that a vaccine is found in due course, and of course, hopefully, other preventative measures can be found as well. So for today, before I reach out to Shehan and bring him in, I just thought I'd best to cover a couple of points and then introduce him. So firstly, everyone is on mute. And secondly, if anyone wishes to ask a question during the session, please can you use the Q&A feature at the, I think you'll find at the bottom of your screen, you should find one icon. And you can select any question you want to ask, of course, and we will see whether we ask the questions at the end of the presentation, which is the usual way which we do in the gatherings, or as Shehan prefers, at the end of each of the topics, because he's going to split his presentation into various sections. So we'll see how we go, and depending on the questions which we get, we can adapt as we go along. So please type the questions in the field as we go along, and we shall see how we go. So now it just leaves me to introduce Shehan. Shehan is the owner of Shehan Stevens Sapphires in San Francisco, California. As you can deduce from his company's name, he is an expert on all aspects of sapphires. The road to this expertise began in 2006 when he developed an interest in sapphires and started to learn about them from the mining level to the retail environment. After working with Sri Lankan miners for 5 years, he moved on to learn about thermal treatment side of the industry and then the cutting side. Following his subsequent studies at the Gem Research and Training Institute in Ratnapura, he decided to employ his knowledge of export and distribution and ventured into the trade as a merchant. His interest in global economies has also helped Shehan develop a unique understanding of sapphire pricing. Shehan is also recognized that there is more to the industry than gems themselves. He admits to adamantly working on understanding the Sri Lankan culture, people, history, and ever-changing political status and economy. He is dedicated in supporting and giving back to the Sri Lankan community and is devoted to socially and environmentally responsible sourcing. Quality assurance is also crucial, so he tries to travel to Sri Lanka 4 or 5 times a year, where he works directly with the miners, purchasing rough directly from the source. So of course, that has been impacted. And he was actually due to join us from Sri Lanka for this event, but he's obviously in San Francisco still. So it shows you how it's impacted everyone. So I hope that gives everyone attending a good idea about Shehan's background and experience. And now it's time to hear a bit more from the man himself. So I will invite Shehan to activate his video and stop being mute, and hopefully we will be able to hear from him. Shehan, please join us.
Okay.
Jehan, okay?
Yes. Thanks, Nick.
Hi. All right. How you doing?
Good. Good.
Good, good. So it's good that you're with us. And as I said in the intro there, the situation has impacted you a lot. You were supposed to be in Sri Lanka. So maybe if there's anything I missed in the intro about you, you could maybe share with everyone, or you can just start off and go into your subjects and talk to us about the colors.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. So just to add on to what Nick just said, I've been in the gemstone industry since 2006, and roughly around 2008, I decided to specialize. I think just as in any other profession, when we build an expertise in one specific area, you know, we can grow in that area in particular. So yeah, my passion really lies in the gemstones, but also helping these communities and being able to educate everyone on what I do, so we can just continue to improve our industry. Yeah, with that said, the title of this presentation is Traditional versus Non-Traditional Color Terms Applied to Sapphire. Specifically, we'll be looking at peach colored sapphires versus Pudparaja, and then blue sapphires versus the teal, green, and yellow green varieties. Get started. I've called this also trend versus passion. So the trend colors are the peach and teal colors, and the passion colors are going to be blue and Pudparaja. So that in GIA terms, the acronym would be B for blue, and then bluish violet or violetish blue. And with the green, teal, and yellow green colors, we'd be looking at greenish blue to bluish green range, which would be teal, green, yellow green, and greenish yellow. With Pudparaja, we'd be looking at orangish red to reddish orange, and depending on the tone and saturation, they would fall into the Pudparaja realm or the peach category. So as Nick mentioned, to be able to answer all of your questions is really important. I think it's next to impossible to cover, you know, in a 1 hour time frame to cover all the content. And it's really important that I'm able to answer the questions which are important to you. So moving forward, here are the questions I would like to answer. And please chime in the Q&A box with your own questions. So starting off with what's driving the teal color, the teal sapphire market? Second, when did the trend begin? Third, how long will it last? Then understanding the pricing volatility. Really important to understand the GIA color wheel for the various colors that I'll be speaking on. And then is there a pricing difference between heated and unheated material in these colors? So to get started here, we're going to look at the green sapphire variety, and that blue-green to greenish blue. If you're able to see my pointer here, we're starting with greenish blue, and the range is actually quite broad. So everything from the greenish blue color down to strong yellowish green. So as you can see, that covers quite a large range. And yeah, so that's basically how that would categorize into the color wheel. So starting off with the bluish green to greenish blue, the one thing that we need to understand is that this color in particular is consumer driven, and I'll hit on peach color as well as consumer driven. So in the traditional sense in our industry, typically emerald, sapphire, ruby are supply driven. So whatever the market threshold is for those colors is what is going to be available to the consumer. But the price and the volatility in this color is primarily it's consumer driven. And it's really important when we're moving forward, when we quantify the color against the price, understanding that the consumers are increasing the price and expecting or demanding more of this. It has a lot to do with where the supply is, for example, with blue sapphire, and the pricing, and finding alternatives to that. So the first market for this is for teal, green, yellow-green is non-traditional bridal. It fits a different market sector. The millennial generation is more budget conscious in regards to luxury goods, and they're interested in high value product. So for all of those that don't understand the formula for value, it's basically quality times price equals value. And they're also very interested in understanding the sustainability, ethics, and transparency involved in bringing the stone to market. So starting off with this stone, it's basically, I categorize this as a yellow-green stone. And another thing I wanted to point out is the data and the statistics are my stats. Following the number of years that one, I've either been in the industry, or number two, that I started collecting these specific colors. So this yellow-green color, green, teal-green, the popularity started about 6 years ago. And initially it was in smaller sizes. But as it began to gain momentum, the size also increased that the consumer was demanding. And also going to the origin, the primary origins that I have been finding this material has been Madagascar, is number one, Sri Lanka, Montana, and Australia. And each origin, I would say, brings slightly different characteristics. So for example, when we're looking at the pure greenish blue to bluish green color, primary source for that is going to be Madagascar. The Sri Lankan material tends to be lighter in tone and slightly less saturated, and it's slightly more yellow. And then Montana is also hitting similar quality color as Madagascar, but unfortunately not in larger sizes. Most of the Montana material is going to be under 1.5 carats. Australia, the drawback with that material has been that the tone is extremely dark, and this tends to be driven by the depth at which it's mined. So for example, this is a typical Sri Lankan yellowish green sapphire. So as you can see, substantially more yellow, less green, and very typical for material that comes from Sri Lanka. So when we're looking at, for example, the pricing change over the last 6 years, again, these are my stats, but back in 2014, standard wholesale price in the US was moving at about 185 per carat. And at the end of last year, it's nearly doubled to, it is actually doubled at 390. So over a 6-year period, or 5-year period, sorry, the price of this material is doubled. So my predictions for this color in particular, and it's extremely popular right now, something to keep in mind is that the color can be cyclical, so very up and down. And like I said, it's trend driven. So as the trend changes, so will the demand for this color. Um, the teal green is also a very strong color. I predict based on the demand and supply aspect, it should last about 2 to 3 years, especially in the 1 to 2 carat round oval, emerald cut and cushion shapes. The fancy shapes tend to be more niche. So moving on to blue sapphire. Here are a few questions that I'd like to answer in regard to blue currently is the current supply and demand, contrary to teal's demand and supply. I'll also go into explaining very, very briefly about the 7 varieties of Gouda. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the term, but there are 7 varieties of this of sapphire. When it comes out of the ground, it's actually whitish until it goes through thermal enhancement. Then I'll also cover the historical pricing over the last 14 years, primary origins, heated versus unheated availability, trade terms versus numerical grading, pricing trends, time versus price for heated, and then pricing trend for time versus price for unheated. So to get started on this color, we're going to start with, for blue, primarily we're looking at violetish blue, so dominant blue, and the secondary hue will be slight violet, and then blue, just a straight blue. So one thing with using trade terms is that the translation can be slightly different. I have a preference to use a more numerical grading system, such as what GIA uses, and sometimes depending on who the buyer is, it has to be adjusted slightly. GIA uses a hue a tone and saturation scale of 1 to 7 and 2 to 8 to describe tone and saturation, which tends to be a numerical grading method, tends to be very specific, which I think basically on the wholesale end is going to be much more beneficial for all of us to describe. So moving on, something that maybe not everyone is familiar with are the varieties of Gouda. Gouda is a whitish material. The chemical composition is aluminum oxide, but with trace elements, titanium, and heat, the color changes to blue. So there are 5 primary types, and then there are 2 additional secondary types. The primary types are Otu, Dum, Silky, Milky, and Diesel. And then the 2 secondary types are going to be Thick Silky and Thick Milky. So during the thermal process, depending on the type of Gouda rough, it's going to have a highly predictable outcome based on the amount of inclusions that are visible preheating. So the heating process goes through something called a cycle and soak, and that's where, depending on the Gouda type, it's going to cycle, meaning the temperature will ramp, and then it will soak at a specific temperature for anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. So the peak temperature, depending on the variety, will stop at either 1500 to 1950 centigrade range. And the outcome, regardless of the type of Gouda, it can result in top color, essentially, or a medium color such as cornflower, or the lighter material. But the key is to understanding the soak and cycle time and temperature. Currently, the primary origins for nice blue right now is going to be Burma, Sri Lanka, and Madagascar. And as Nick mentioned earlier, with the global pandemic, right now, the amount of rough that's actually coming out of the ground is minimal. I just checked with some of the people that I work with in Sri Lanka, and they said, and they've just mentioned to me that that mining production is roughly 15% right now, which is possibly going to impact the price, depending on how long it's going to take to reach 100% capacity. Essentially, you know, in Sri Lanka, there are as many as anywhere between 5,000 and about 2,500, or sorry, 5,200 mining licenses issued per year. So if we're looking at about 15% capacity right now, I think we could see a pricing shift coming up. So the other side of that, with the lack of mining, is the increasing price of both unheated and heated material. There will be a scarcity of top quality blue, and then obviously medium to top quality unheated material. The other part that's impacting us right now is the current supply and demand, and also blue being the Pantone color of the year. So typically, when these colors come in style, demand is going to increase. And because this year was blue, it's definitely being impacted because of mining production. So I'd like to just go through and make a couple descriptions on color. So this would fall into your typical cornflower blue, medium color, and to be more descriptive, a violetish blue with a tone of 4 and a saturation of 3. So if we were to look at the pricing trend here, going back to 2008 to 19, and we're also looking at unheated versus heated. Oh, sorry. As it's described or labeled here, we're looking at a 2 to 3 carat average for royal blue to open royal blue. And so if I were to give you a color description, that would be a hue of blue, straight blue, and a tone of 6 and a saturation of 6. And you can see here, 2008, the price for heated was right around, unheated material was right around 850 per carat, and for heated about 450. So essentially very close to double the price. But another thing to keep in mind is in this 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframe, a large part what was impacting the price was the end of the civil war in Sri Lanka. And then we start seeing substantial increase. The trajectory is substantially sharper. And especially between 2010 to 2013, the trajectory was very sharp. And then we started seeing substantially more foreign buyers coming into the country at that point. I would say there was a sharp change also between 2015 to 2019 because of what I would call like a second monsoon season in Sri Lanka, hitting right around the end of April to the end of May. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the flooding that was taking place, but this definitely impacted mining in Sri Lanka. So my predictions for blue, it is the most popular color here in the U.S. and it should stay strong moving forward. But obviously, as I had mentioned earlier, the current environment, meaning mining being so low, is going to impact the pricing. There's a steady trajectory in price will continue on the top end, but we could see some slowdown with the lower end material. I would say if I were to grade it, quality 1 to 3 should be strong, but slower. But also we're going to be looking at the civil unrest, natural disasters, and also, right now the global pandemic. All of these things will impact pricing for the future. Sri Lanka, being one of the largest producers of blue sapphire, has only mined currently 3% of its land. Unheated blue sapphires in the 3 to 7 carat range will see pricing increases of 20 to 25% year over year that are Burma and Sri Lankan origin. So just moving forward, we're getting into the peach color now. And understanding peach, it's actually a blended mix of pinkish orange to orangish pink. And what I call in the field, I'm looking for 80% of one color and 20% of the other to determine whether it falls into the Padparaja range or a peach color. And I'll get into that with more being more descriptive as we move forward. Again, what's driving the market for this color? Similar to teal, this is based on demand and supply. And then we'll look at some sample peach color, the sample peach color range. And the real question, the harder alternative to morganite, that's one thing that was driving the peach market was the probably the pricing of morganite, but then the hardness of a sapphire was making it more attractive. Then I also want to hit on stability issues. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar, but Padparaja, peach, yellow, and orange have had, at specific temperature points, they have had issues with fading. And then again, looking at pricing volatility and trajectory. So the peach range is going to go anywhere from the orangish red to orangish yellow. So everything in this range right here. And one major factor versus looking at the teal is we do have to look at the tone and saturation substantially more to make that call between a peach and a Padparaja. So the light to dark is going to be one factor, and that's defined as tone, and it's on a 2 to 8 scale. And the saturation scale is going to run from 1 to 6. So saturation is defined as the amount of color. So for example, this would be classified as a orangish yellow, sometimes known as a champagne peach. Also coined, also another term is sunrise. So definitely very strong areas of orange here, and then subtle yellow. So in the field, when I'm looking for the difference between a Padparaja and a peach color sapphire, I try to see how much of orange and how much of pink is present in the stone. And so you can obviously see in this material, or this picture specifically, substantially more orange, lighter tone, which would categorize it in the peach category. As I mentioned earlier, it's a similar market to teal and green sapphires, alternative bridal, and it is also it's demand and supply driven. But again, another example of a peach sapphire. So here we're looking at it's the same picture or same sapphire as the previous slide. And we're looking here at a peach, which is definitely lower in saturation and low in tone. So if I were to grade this using the GIA scale, you're looking at about a 2 in saturation and about a 2 in tone. Another thing that I did want to mention was the stability issues in peach and Padparaja. And very specifically, it's peach Padparaja, also yellow and orange sapphires. So it's impacting all 4 of those colors. What I have found, and from my experience, is that it's happening from one primarily Madagascar origin. So it's something to make sure that when you have Padparaja or a peach sapphire, getting them tested to make sure that you're not passing on, an inferior product to your customers is really important. So the laboratories, GIA, for example, will use something called a fade test, and they're using basically a light source and temperature to determine whether the color will change. My understanding from the articles that I've read is that it is possible to bring the color back with UV light. So, but that's also a per stone case. It's not 100%, but in most cases, the color can be brought back. As I mentioned, I do believe from the purchases that I have made in rough and as well as cut and polish, one thing that I've noticed is most of the time the issue with fading is with Madagascar material. And so again, I just wanted to show you guys an example of a peach sapphire, very low tone and low saturation, but you can see the areas of orange and more pink. And again, we're looking at the hue, tone, and saturation, lower tone. It's going to be a pinkish orange, but a lower tone and a lower saturation. So we would get the peach call for something like this, or fancy colored sapphire. And here we're looking at this would probably get an orange sapphire laboratory call. But because of the hue, tone, and saturation, we're looking at more champagne peach because of the tone and saturation. This, based on the hue, which is more of a yellowish orange, it wouldn't fall into the Padparaja realm. And just another case here, which would fall into the peach category, but there is slight pink in the stone, if you can see here, but lower tone and lower saturation. And so I just want to share this graph with you. We're looking at 2 to 4 carat peach color, which are going to be in the which would average 2.93 carats with a 2.93 average. And we're looking at my personal consumption, how much of this material was being purchased, and the weight is cut and polished. And so there was a drastic shift. 1 second here. in 2017, and this was due to the because of the Pantone color, as I had mentioned. So this is always, Pantone has typically brought more awareness to specific colors and specific color ranges, and we can see the drastic shift in pricing over the last 5 years. So, sorry, drastic shift in consumption. So the amount of material that was being purchased. And looking at the pricing shift, starting in 2015 to 2019, in 2015, we're looking at 350 per carat, and a gradual increase to 2019 at 570 per carat. And we're looking at the same factors in the 2 to 4 carat range with an average of 2.93 carats. So my predictions in this color are, even though there are stability issues with the lab cert, the issue can be eliminated with the fade test. The color has lower long-term price volatility versus the green. And again, the use of a numerical grading system will be helpful since each has a lower tone and saturation. So the final color I'll be speaking on, or the final color of Sapphire, is the Pudparaja. And I'll go over really briefly about the color description that's used in the source. And primarily we look at two types. One is the rising sun and the other is the setting sun. And the term comes from the Sinhalese word for lotus flower. Again, with Pudparaja, because of it being native to Sri Lanka, origin has impacted it. Has impacted the price of Pudparajas, because typically traditionalists are looking for material that's coming from Sri Lanka, but there are newer sources for Pudparaja, such as Madagascar, which tends to fit into a different market sector as far as price, but it still is going to have that delicate balance of orange and pink, and a more vibrant tone and saturation versus peach color. Again, Pudparaja also falls into the 4 colors that have stability issues. So, making sure that it gets that fade test is important to be able to pass that confidence on to your customer. So there are 2 types as far as color description that's used at the source, and then it's also used, as the forward-facing on the retail end to describe the color as well to the consumer. One is the rising sun, which tends to be more pinkish orange, and the other is going to be the setting sun, which is going to be more orangish pink. That's the primary difference, but there is also a market sector for these 2 colors. Typically, what I have found is the Western market, meaning the United States, North America, and Europe, typically likes the rising sun, which is going to be more orange dominant, and the Asian market, I've found, likes the more pink dominant secondary orange color. So here's, I think, a good example of the rising sun. Stronger orange color, slight pink, but definitely enough, it's well saturated, which would give it a Pudparaja call. So again, speaking on origin, I would say there's as much as a 20% discrepancy for a Sri Lankan origin stone, just because of the historical and traditional nature behind Putparaja. And so we'll go on to describe this as a orangish pink, or the sunset variety. This would also be the sunset variety of Putparaja. Definitely an orangish pink, and I would grade this as a 5 saturation and a 4 in tone. And that will end my presentation. Please feel free to take my details here and get in touch with me if there are any further questions.
Okay, thanks a lot, Shehan, and it's great to listen to you and see your slides. As far as the questions are concerned, I said that anyone who's participating is perfectly free to ask questions. I've got a few, but I sort of wanted to ask based on what notes I took during the presentation myself. So also some observations too. So for example, you said that only 3% of land in Sri Lanka had been mined. I thought that was sort of quite an interesting statistic. I would have thought it was maybe been higher than that. So, I mean, these are from the government records. How did this sort of 3% figure come about?
Yes, so I attended a lecture that was given by the Gem and Jewelry Authority 2019. And this was a fact that was, this was a number that was given in the lecture about why they choose, specifically why they continue to choose traditional mining method, which is pit mining. So because due to that method versus the mechanical mines, there are, the last stat I got on mechanical mining, Nick, was there's only 5 that are operating right now in Sri Lanka, 5 or 6, just to give you a range. But the 5,000 licenses that I had mentioned earlier, they're all pit mining. They don't actually, right now they've outlawed river mining because of the impact to the environment. So yeah, it's definitely a believable number based on the number of licenses that have been issued, and it's lower impact pit mining.
Right, and so the potential must still be huge in Sri Lanka then for gems still to be discovered.
Yeah, I think that's also another point that I got from that presentation, was that since it's low, it's different. It's hard work. Pit mining is hard work, but because it's low impacting, sometimes our concern is, how many more years are we going to be able to continue mining gems and minerals? And based on these numbers, it seems to be quite some time.
Okay. Another observation was that you mentioned for the sources for the teal stones, really, as Madagascar, Australia, Sri Lanka, Montana, Australia, and I noticed Nigeria was missing. What can you say about the Nigerian stones?
The Nigerian, so it's not to say that Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia does not produce it, but I don't believe that production is at a point where it is where it's hit a point where it's important yet. Nigerian material, so far what I have seen is that the Nigerian material we're not seeing enough of it in the market, not yet. And the same goes for the Ethiopian and Kenyan and Tanzanian material.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's interesting to know.
I'm not trying to say that it's not there. It is coming out of the ground, but I believe, the quantity is just not very much.
So maybe now during COVID, with all the mining activity that probably is still going on, I mean, it just cannot be exported and it cannot go to all the trading centers like Thailand. So possibly once we come out of this, there will be quite a sudden influx of goods from different parts of the mining world coming into the markets.
It's quite possible. And I think, like I said, with this color, Nick, because it's demand driven, the demand and price and economics, they kind of all swirl around together. And it's going to be really interesting once we come out of this current pandemic. It's going to be really interesting to see what region, what countries are going to really step up and make the correct adjustments to possibly be a bigger player as far as production goes in the gemstone industry. So I know East Africa really wants, and I see their the ability to produce is there. But again, they're still learning. But I believe that coming out of this, that they will want to basically represent their countries in a larger role than like the traditional Burmese, Thai, Sri Lanka, Australia.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see what develops. We have a question from one of the attendees now. It says, blue, green, teal stones have become popular only recently. What happened to these colored sapphires in the centuries before?
It's not to say that they were not available, but what I have observed, Nick, is that blue green, as I said previously, is consumer driven. So when we look at historical data information, the kings and queens priced blue sapphire. But as things have changed, especially recently, sapphires have hit all-time high in the last year, and I think once they start hitting a specific threshold, consumers will start looking for other alternatives. It's just natural. So when we're looking at a 10 karat no heat loop clean blue sapphire, which is going to be perfect GIA 6.6 tone saturation, you're looking at probably wholesale in the 15 to 17,000 per carat range. And once we start hitting those type of thresholds, consumers are definitely going to start looking for alternatives, which are going to be more affordable, and they're also looking at the sustainability, ethics, transparency. They want to continue to support businesses and communities, not necessarily tradition.
Okay, well, yeah. Again, as I said, it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah.
Once it's all over, what happens. But your graphs that you were showing, I mean, the trend, virtually everything which you showed was been upwards. I mean, over the years, for the last 5 years, upwards, upwards, upwards. And now we're in the present day where we have this situation. No doubt, when you redraw this to include 2020, there's going to be a dip. But you still believe that would just be a dip and that it will continue upwards over the years to come?
I actually don't see. So let me quantify this slightly differently. So let's take the entire sapphire market into 3 sectors. The lower quality goods, which are going to be eye visible, lower saturation. Let's say a grade of 3 and down, 2 or 3, and then lower tone. That material with eye visible to heavily included material, that market will stay stable. The market that's going to continue to grow through the pandemic and onward into the next year, 2, 3 years, is going to be the top market. Basically, I just spoke about grade 1 to 3, then we're looking at 4 to 7, but grade 8, 9, 10, I could see, even with the current situation, that will continue to grow year over year for at least the next 3 years. with at least a 5% trajectory, like improvement or increase in price. And that,
Okay.
that's the top end market.
Right. Okay. Well, I suppose it sort of makes sense that the higher demand would be for the top end. So
Yeah.
it'll be good to see how it pans out in a few years' time and look at your graphs again. We have another question as well. Do you think less people nowadays are less concerned about the rarity of the gems, just by noticing the teal sapphires are so popular now? Would there be a raise of price of teal sapphire from your point of view?
Yes, it's a given. That's what I'm seeing. The fear that I have is because it is a non-traditional color. It has not been historically priced, for hundreds of years. There could be substantial volatility with the pricing, and like I said, it's a demand. The consumption is based on demand. So the minute that trend changes, the pricing could go up or down depending on which direction that goes. But pricing that I could see for the foreseeable future, let's say for the next year to 2 years, I believe here teal will be strong again because the consumer wants. They're really interested in the sustainability, transparency, ethics side of it, and green standing for those three factors in particular.
Okay. I think the
They're
sorry.
supporting. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, he's just trying to clarify, but he was thinking, the point is, are less people concerned about the rarity?
Yeah, I believe so. I think the millennial generation, which is essentially 25 to 45, is not as concerned about tradition. So the rarity is was one of the traditions, and supply and demand. The supply is what would dictate the price historically, but now consumers want what they want, and they're dictating what direction things go in, and they don't care about. They tend to not care as much about tradition.
Okay. All right. And on the sort of Padparadscha side and the peach side, I know from my experience before in dealing with, the clients requesting reports, etc., that in Japan, the Padparadscha market was pretty strong. Is that still your take on it now? Is Japan still a good market for Padparadschas?
I believe it is still strong, but I also think the Chinese have overtaken that
Really?
for the pinkish dominant, orangish secondary version of Padparadscha.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's interesting. So, yeah. Um, I have one other one because we're sort of getting towards the end of time now. We're sort of nearly to the hour mark. It was just an observation, but it's good to see the metamorphic and basaltic sapphires covered in the teal group. And is there more color zoning and unevenness in the basaltic source stones? And does this make them less desirable and hence less, and then obviously impact the value of these stones from the basaltic deposits?
Yeah, the beauty of the stone is what it comes down to, and so the basaltic deposits versus or the color zoning. There's definitely a big pricing discrepancy between the two, between just a nice, beautiful, even teal color or a bicolor sapphire, which is going to have both green and yellow and a yellowish green. So yeah, I think it definitely impacts the price.
Okay. All right. And I think we have just time for one more. I don't know if anyone else is going to ask a question from the attendees, but I have one based on the cut. You discussed cut a little bit, and maybe this is sort of an important factor. I think for some of the stones, you're saying like for the rectangulars, heart shapes, baguettes, the different types of cuts, but not so much the round brilliants. But if you have somebody who can do really exceptional cutting, would example, the teal stones would be better in a round brilliant, or you think the other cuts are better for that color?
Well, what my observation so far, Nick, is most of the teals are cut into either an emerald cut or an oval. Substantially less rounds, but the demand is strong for rounds. But again, we're looking at the crystal growth structure, or the formation of the crystal. Sorry, and you know, anytime we're looking at sapphire, anything slightly more elongated is going to produce a higher yield. And at the end of the day, we're looking at a combination of factors, and we've tried to bring all those factors to a delta. So, you know, hue tone saturation is part of that, but I also calculate, you know, the amount of silk, and then obviously the size of the crystal, and then we just try to factor all those things together to a delta to bring that to a price. And you know, beauty is a big part of what we do, and making sure that we can produce a beautiful stone, but not necessarily what I would just say having a higher or a lower yield so that we can get the most beauty does not necessarily make the most sense all the time. You know, it is again a natural resource, which I personally feel is terrible to turn it into dust. So I think being considerate of that is really important.
Okay. Yep. Well, makes sense. And it's good to see that from your introduction, which I gave, and from what you were saying, that ethics plays a very important part in your business. And it's good to see that you're trying to sort of drive that side of the business.
Yeah, it's important. And I think especially the future of our industry is going to fall on ethics, transparency, sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if we're not there yet, we're very soon going to have to be, because we want to always consider who we want to support, the people who are involved in our industry, and how we want to support them, because that's our future. So
Yep.
yeah, I believe it's important.
Okay, well, that's probably a good place to end. Really, we've almost got to an hour exactly since we started. So, you know, I appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise and all the data that you've collected over the years. And you've been in business just over 14 years, I think, and started
Yes.
from almost nothing or virtually nothing. I heard in one presentation you gave before. So it seems you've done really well. And of course, I hope that success continues for years to come. So much appreciated.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it.
Okay. And maybe just the last thing I'll mention when we leave is that tomorrow night, GIA has one of its knowledge sessions, and it's on the history of diamond cutting and polishing technology. And it will be by Dr. Evan Smith. So I hope that anyone who's attending will be able to join that event as well. It's 10 a.m. US Pacific daytime. So thank you very much. And I wish you well, Shehan, and everybody who's joined us. And we'll no doubt meet again at the next gathering. So that will be sort of publicized once we have it ready, all the details ready. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.